Council for the town of Los Gatos. Can we have a roll call vote, please?
Thank you and good evening. Councilmember Syak.
Here.
Councilmember Rennie.
Here.
Vice Chair Spector.
Here.
Mayor and Chair Jensen.
Here. Earlier this evening, the council had the pleasure of talking with a number of residents who are interested in serving the town on boards and commissions. We then conducted a ballot by email, which we submitted to our town clerk, who has tabulated those results. So Ms. Neese, are you ready to let us know who has been appointed?
Yes, I am. For the Arts and Culture Commission, Michael Miller with 4 votes, Pamela Murphy with 3 votes, Ellis Weeker with 4 votes. So for Michael Miller, Jensen, Rennie, Syak, and Spector unanimously, and the same for Ellis Weeker. For Pamela Murphy, Councilmember Rennie, Councilmember Syak, and Vice Mayor Spector were the votes for her. For the Building Board of Appeals, Charles Holcomb unanimously. For Community Health and Senior Services, Richard Conrad unanimously. For Complete Streets and Transportation Commission, Bill Ellers and Jillian Verga, both unanimously. For the General Plan Committee, Joseph Menina with 3 votes, Jensen, Rennie, and Syak, and Steve Piasecki with 3 votes, Rennie, Syak, and Spector. For Historic Preservation Committee, Barry Cheskin and Timothy Lundell, both unanimously. For the Library Board, Susan Buxton unanimously, Richard Capitosto with 3 votes, Rennie, Syak, and Spector, and Sabia Chunawala unanimously. For the Parks Commission, Ariana Alves unanimously. For Personnel, Steve Bakota unanimously. For Planning Commission, Catherine Janoff unanimously.
Thank you very much, Ms. Neese. And to those of you who applied, thank you so much for doing so. It's so important. Public service, I happen to think, is a great thing. And if you can give back to a community like Los Gatos, that's a great thing. And to be able to contribute and give ideas, make policy, tell the council what you want to do is fantastic. Those of you who did not get appointed, please try again. As Mr. Rennie said, for example, the Planning Commission is going to have 2 openings coming up very shortly, and we'd like you to stay involved. So please apply. Just because you didn't get it this time doesn't mean you won't get it next time. So thank you so much for your participation. And to those of you who were appointed, congratulations and welcome. And we will move on then to council and manager matters. I'll start with Mr. Rennie.
Thank you, Mayor. On 11/5, the VTA Governance and Audit Committee and the board met. The open session was a light agenda, and we had a long closed session reviewing the general manager and the general counsel. 11/9, the Silicon Valley Clean Energy Authority Risk Oversight Committee met. 11/11, the Emergency Operating Area Council met for the first time since COVID. We reviewed all the disasters of 2020, of which there was a long list that they were involved in. Going forward, they're forecasting a chance of drier and warmer weather through January on the waterfront. On 11/12, the Cities Association Selection Committee appointed me to the Bay Area Air Quality Management District Board, which I'm very excited to get started on the work there. And I want to special thank you to Councilmember Syak for her kind words that on my behalf that I'm sure pushed me over the top there. On 11/13, the Silicon Valley Clean Energy Authority Board met, and we continued moving forward on a super JPA of 9 other of the community choice segregation in different counties to do large projects together. Although we haven't completely formed the super JPA yet, we've already put out an RFI to have a 500 megawatt of 8-hour storage built that we all would share in, and will help us address the need for electricity when the sun is not shining and the wind is not blowing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rennie. Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I attended the West Valley Clean Water Authority Board meeting, the West Valley Solid Waste Board meeting. In both cases, I would say the most significant action was non-action, where there were budgetary items. We delayed decisions until the February board meeting because of concerns of the jurisdiction's financial situation. And then the ad hoc wildfire committee met 2 times. I believe we finished our work yesterday, and we will be coming forward to the entire council at our next meeting. And that's when you're going to tell us we did great and you like everything we did.
Councilwoman Sack.
Thank you. As Councilmember Rennie said, he was appointed to represent Santa Clara County cities on BACMID. The other appointee was Mayor Constantine of Morgan Hill. And we also voted to appoint Mayor Margaret Abicoga of Mountain View to represent the cities on MTC. In addition to that, the League of Cities Peninsula Division met to begin planning out next year. And just a reminder for new council members elected that in addition to the statewide forums that we have that provide training and resources, that the Peninsula Division also will be a resource to all newly elected council members.
Thank you. I'm also a member of the Ad hoc Fire Committee. We did hopefully complete our work yesterday. The committee worked fast, it worked hard, and it worked well. So as the Vice Mayor says, we'll be coming to you on December 1st and accept your congratulations. But I also participated in multiple General Plan Advisory Committee meetings that took place after November 3rd regarding different issues that will probably get discussed this evening as well. Of interest in particular is I attended the VTA Policy Advisory Committee meeting this last week. And one of the items on the agenda was a discussion of whether it was appropriate for the VTA board to determine that it was going to spend Measure B funds, not on local streets and roads, but on essentially financing the completion of BART. The Policy Advisory Committee unanimously voted to tell the board that we did not want that change to happen, that local streets and roads were very important to us, that was a primary reason that cities in the West Valley or around that were represented in the Policy Advisory Committee had supported Measure B and wanted it because it did give monies back to our community and did give us, if we got to a certain pavement condition index, funds that we could spend in a discretionary manner for things like school buses or bicycle and pedestrian or whatever it might be. So the Policy Advisory Committee was very strong in its message to the VTA board that the spending plan for BART was not appropriate, in our view at least. And with that, I'm going to go to Mr. Schultz for a closed session report.
Yes, good evening. Prior to tonight's regular session, council met in closed session to discuss significant exposure to litigation. The matter that was discussed was the claim that has been filed by Summerhill Homes against the town in regards to the denial by town council of the modification for the North 40 project. No action was taken that requires reporting under the Act. Brown Act.
Thank you, Mr. Schultz. The next item on our agenda is our consent calendar. It consists of 5 items tonight. These are item, what, Ms.
Sorry, Mayor, did
Spector.
you manager manners?
I'm sorry, Ms. Pavetti.
Thank you. Yeah, no,
Sorry.
worry. That's all right. I just wanted to announce that we are doing free COVID testing on Monday, November 30th. So please sign up and get your test. It is free. It's very well organized. It's all COVID safe. It's a great experience. We're also very excited that the holidays are coming and our tree that is at the Town Plaza Park will be lit So look forward to seeing that lit, as well as the new displays that the town is installing in collaboration with the chamber. So there's lots to look forward to this holiday season. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Betty, and I apologize. The next item on our agenda is consent calendar. That normally consists of items that are non-controversial in nature that can be voted on in a single motion. That said, if any member of the council wants to pull an item from the consent calendar, or if any member of the public wants to pull an item from the consent calendar, you may do so. To do that, if you are participating with us tonight, either press *9 on your phone or raise your blue hand. I do see someone with their blue hand raised, and that's David Weissman. I'm not sure, Dr. Weissman, whether you want to be pulling an item or you want to be recognized on something different. We'll unmute you so you can let us know.
I would like to pull item number 3.
Item number 3. Okay. So when an item is pulled, we hear that in its normal order on our agenda. So when we get there, we will hear item number 3. With the exclusion of item number 3, do I have any motion on the consent calendar?
I move to approve items 1, 2, 4, and 5 on consent.
Is there a second?
Second from Rennie.
Seconded by Councilman Rennie. As we do on Zoom, all of our motions are done via roll call vote. So I'll call on the members of the council for their vote. Councilman Rennie?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Spector?
Yes.
Councilwoman Sayoc?
Yes.
And the mayor votes yes. So the consent calendar minus item 3 passes unanimously. The next item that we have on our agenda is an opportunity for members of the public to speak to us on something that is not on our agenda tonight. The substantive matters on our agenda are now an agreement regarding a consultant for arborist services, vehicle miles traveled discussion, and a discussion regarding our general plan. If you want to talk to us about something that I haven't mentioned, now you can do that for 3 minutes. Because these items that you're going to talk about haven't been put publicly noticed, you just give us information, but we don't engage in a dialogue with you. So I see a couple of hands. First one is Alex Holt.
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
Perfect. Hey, council members, how are you guys doing through this crazy time? So I hope everyone's doing okay. I wanted to just kind of point out a couple of things. I wanted to bring up the fact that Los Gatos did an incredible job in the start of COVID. I've been pretty quiet during this process because it's been kind of busy, and I just kind of wanted to publicly announce that I feel like you guys all stepped up on the leadership role. I feel like there's a lack of leadership on the federal level as well as on the county level. But I think you guys did a great job in the city of Los Gatos, or town of Los Gatos. And just wanted to say thank you guys for all of that. I feel like Los Gatos kind of led the way with the Parklet program. We eased up on a lot of processes, and we made things happen together by working through some issues. I think especially Rob Schultz deserve a little shout out for kind of, finding solutions to problem instead of just looking at the rule book and saying, we can't do that, we can't do that, we can't do that. These are unprecedented times, and we have to find solutions to help people survive, whether it's, the people out on the streets, or if it's the businesses, or if it's the government. So we all need to just kind of work together. With that being said, I feel like it's been very quiet the last, few months, and we're going into a very dark time where, just today we got indoor dining shut down. We pulled from orange all the way back to purple on Newsom's fantastic plan. So I think it's important that we kind of get back into it, that we have these meetings, we come together as a community and start looking at solutions. We have to find ways to keep people wet. I mean, not wet, basically keep people dry and warm out on patios for restaurants to survive. There is a lot of people working in restaurants that is very much, in trouble right now. They don't have any other ways to go. Like, if we can't pay them, no one else can, and they will really suffer. So I think it's pivotal that we come together, work through some of these problems. There's a propane shortage through the entire United States. How do we keep people warm? How do we build tents are flying around everywhere. Like, how do we build structures so people feel comfortable sitting outside eating through this next 3 months here that we are facing? Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Holt, and for everything that you did during this process and continue to do. Jeff Suzuki.
Good evening, everyone. When we held our community conversation on police, there were a number of possible reforms proposed. At the end of the day, the vast majority of these proposals share something in common. Public safety is broader than the police, and we should explore those options seriously. Since October, we have seen progress in establishing a form of independent oversight for police. However, we've also seen the chief of police and the town manager argue that the 2 existing vacancies must be operated by sworn officers because we're going to be stretched thin as this town grows. Additionally, as Rob Rennie pointed out, it isn't entirely clear what the role of the CSO will occupy or why the position's upkeep is about 3/4 of what a traditional officer makes. Currently, we aren't seeing any functional, substantial questioning of the status quo. What we are going to do with our police department isn't exactly clear, because I'll tell you, it looks like we're just going to spend more money on top of what we're already spending on the police to quell public sentiment. I do not think that that is a desirable outcome for almost anyone. We have vacancies, and I do not believe that we should fill them with sworn officers and continue doing the same thing that we've always been doing. I think we need to seriously take the time to plan before devoting more resources to the police. Therefore, I propose that we freeze the hiring of sworn officers and additional discretionary spending to the police department. And considering that Los Gatos is the most heavily policed town among the greater area, when you include Cupertino, Saratoga, Morgan Hill, Campbell, Los Altos Hill, and our own town, we have the highest number of service hours billed per capita. I do not believe that we would be endangering our time, town, by taking the time to fully plan out what to do before allocating more resources. Our department responds to 3,800 calls a year that other departments typically do not respond to: dogs barking, parking violations, and etc. We have time. I want us to think back to the Silva incident. Silva brutalized a man who was screaming that he had a brain tumor. He posed no imminent physical threat to anyone. And I ask, what if Silva hadn't been sent there in the first place? Or what if Silva simply realized that Los Gatos had better tools at its disposal? He did not have to engage. And I can tell you that other smaller towns have these sorts of programs. Alexandria, Kentucky has around 10,000 people, and they have a social worker program integrated in public safety. Eugene, Oregon, and Denver have them. And I strongly believe that we can too. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Suzuki. Ali Miano.
Thank you. I just want to support what Jeff has to say. I think we need to be very careful about the expenditure of police funds. And I've seen over-policing, as I mentioned, I believe in a meeting a couple of weeks ago, right here in Bachman Park, with 2 police cars for officers, 2 perhaps social workers, young women with clipboards, a fire truck with a couple of firefighters, and an ambulance, all there to pick up one man who appeared to have spent the night in the creek bed and was going willingly. And not only that, but they all blocked traffic as they conversed in the middle of the street and people had to make a U-turn to go around them. I don't think we need to be spending our, dollars, especially at a time like this, in any kind of a careless manner. And that particular incident that I observed seemed to do that. So yes, I would think that we need citizen oversight, and I think we need to spend our money wisely in the town. And along those lines, I wanted to bring up one other point, and that's transportation. As somebody who has had to drive her car to the light rail in Campbell because Los Gatos doesn't have a light rail, and take the light rail to Caltrain and Caltrain to a bus to get to work 5 days a week so that I can hopefully be a better citizen and not pollute the environment on my 25-mile commute or 20-mile commute. I would really like to see more BART. I can't tell you how many times, gosh, I've lived in Los Gatos for 55 years for the most part, except going to college and such. How many times have we voted to get BART all around the Bay? We need public transportation, and we need it in Los Gatos. All kinds of people need it. Not everybody, has a Tesla or, can drive a motorized bike when they come home from work at 9 o'clock at night, which is what, not all of us work from 9 to 5 either. So I would like to support BART, and I'll live with a few more potholes for a while if we can get BART going. So yes, more public transportation, and let's hold the line on the police expenditures till we see how things are really being allocated. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Lionel Gardner. I don't know if I'm saying that right, Lionel or Lionel.
Well, you're saying it as good as you can say it.
Okay. How is you supposed to be said?
Well, when I was a kid, French names were very popular, so it's actually Lionel. But it got recognized, it got Americanized because no one could say that. So
okay.
Lionel is fine.
Sorry.
No worries, no worries. I just want to talk about the funding and defunding of policing. It means a lot. It means different things to different people, to different communities, to different ethnicities, Black and brown, that work in Los Gatos, that drive through Los Gatos, that visit Los Gatos. So I just want to read a little bit of my correspondence with President Barack Obama. There's still a war on drugs, a war that makes no sense, because the opium poppy continue to blow in the fields of Afghanistan. Even though the American military has been in Afghanistan for 17 years, you see, we lost the real war on drugs, that war against the cartels. I wrote a letter to Barack Obama while he was still the president, and I asked him, how can you give young Black youth 25 years for a few hits of crack while the heroin trade increased 300% in Afghanistan, the world's heroin distribution hub? How can you have a Marshall Plan for Afghanistan and no Marshall Plan for the inner city? Barack wrote me back, and he told me that your question is not a question for the federal government. It is a question for the state. This was after he sent the feds into EPA, East Palo Alto, to raid my family. You see, the reason why we want to defund the police is because that money was originally supposed to be used to fight a war against our real enemy, the cartels, not the American people. Originally, the police were complaining that they were being outgunned by the cartels. They were being outgunned because the cartels had unlimited funds. So in order to fight a war against the cartels, they needed to match the cartels gun for gun. They needed a military budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gardner. The next person is someone that's only identified as Russ.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Kinda.
Okay, sorry. My cell phone coverage is a little bit spotty. I apologize. I'll make it really quick. I just wanted to co-sign on what I believe is Ali said about BART. I don't know if you guys have ever looked at the original map from the 1960s. It was a thing of beauty. It was absolutely gorgeous. And I mean, with 60 years of hindsight, we can see just how much of an opportunity we missed out on back then, right? To make a real, accessible, effective, efficient, environmentally friendly public transportation system. And so, yeah, I mean, BART as it is one thing. BART as it was meant to be and as it could still be is something else entirely. And so, yeah, co-sign on that. And to echo Jeff's point about the status quo, I mean, the status quo is not working for citizens of this country. It's not working for citizens of the state. It's not working well for citizens of Los Gatos, right? And for Los Gatos to be an inclusive and welcoming town, in deed rather than just in word, we need to follow through on some of the commitments that we made this summer, some of the commitments we made to all of Los Gatos' citizens, not just the ones who are more privileged or more fortunate, want a few more coin tosses. Anyway, sorry about the terrible audio quality. Thank you so much for your time. I'll yield the rest of it. I hope that someone heard something.
Thank you. We did hear you. Thank you. Next speaker is Catherine Summers.
Good evening, Council. Actually, you probably noticed I've raised my hand and put it down and raised it again. I just really actually wanted to echo what Alex Holt said, and it was really nice that he came on and gave a lot of credit where credit's due, that we were ahead of this curve when we started with the Parklet program, and you made all the decisions you made, and we were sort of first out there and set the stage, set the example for a lot of other towns. Now we're in this again, and it was really hard today to be at work and hearing from a lot of these restaurant owners in particular, and small business owners as well, as to what in the world are we going to do. And I think, before I thought maybe the town shouldn't get involved and help out, and I don't know, budget wise, if you really can, but I think we're really going to have to come together more than we even thought we were going to have to come together. And I know, Council, your dais is changing here in the next couple weeks, but I hope that the two of you that are leaving and the two of you that are staying, might discuss this in the next 2 or 3 weeks and really set the stage for what we need to do to make sure that our businesses feel like we all care. It's sort of that, there's the business, the small business component and the chamber, and there's the town government, and there's the property owners, and then there is the residents, and somehow we all kind of have to come to the table. And maybe it is a task force. And I know that, Marcia, you weren't really, into a task force, but I think now looking ahead 2 or 3 years, I think we're really going to have to determine where we want to be in a year from now. And I think it's going to take all of us coming to the table or a group and deciding that. So I hope that you really heard Alex, and I hope that, everybody in town who's listening tonight goes out and shops and dines local. Maybe we can figure out something with this tent situation. We all kind of help each other out on that so that they all look nice and that we stay ahead of the curve. I mean,
Ms. Summers, thank you very much.
They're a little delayed.
No worries. Okay, there's someone who is identified as Les and Matt.
Hello, Council. Yeah, my name is Matt Himmis, and my wife Leslie is with me as well. So it's Matt and Leslie here. I do want to one pose a question and then also echo Jeff, I believe, sentiments. I believe, about a month or so ago, we had a nice meeting with the police chief, and I felt it was a very good conversation. A lot of things were put on the table. I'm not sure whatever happened after that. There were supposed to be some action items. Specifically, we talked about de-escalation tactics, different training programs that the police force could potentially be involved with to help the ever-growing issue that we have with the police force in this country, and most importantly, Los Gatos, the town that we live in and we raise our children in. So I guess my first question is, yes, what has happened to all the talking points from that meeting about a month ago? And then also, when we talk about the adding officers to the police force currently, I would suggest, and I'd like to go on record by stating that I believe before hiring 2 new officers, sworn in officers, I believe spend that money sending every single officer to the de-escalation training that is given. The police chief, if I can recall correctly, he says, yeah, a few people have gone in, but not my whole force. So I just really wanted to go on the record and say, yes, I support Jeff's sentiments, but I also would like to know what happened with all the policies and the conversations that were talked about in that meeting and where we go from here in regards to that. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it from me and my wife both. Thank you.
Thank you. I started out this segment by saying we don't engage and answer questions, but the very next council meeting after the community conversation about police, the council did take action to discuss what priorities it had vis-a-vis the police, and then after that, authorized the implementation of a program for independent review of police activity, and talked about some other items in Ms. Pavetti. I think that could be found on the town's website. So I would encourage you to go to the town's website and look for, I think it's probably on our inclusivity, becoming an inclusive community page. So you can look and see what happened at the meetings and what the council did for that. So thank you for participating. And I'm going to go to the next speaker, who is someone who is listed as Indigenous Los Gatos resident. And that is Alicia.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Wow, I have no idea why it says Indigenous Los Gatos resident.
That's what it says.
That's so weird. Okay. Well, I am, but hi everybody. Hi Laurel. Hello. I just wanted to also say that I absolutely agree with everything that Jeff has said. I am, as the last person that just spoke, I'm also a little bit confused as to the amazing conversations that we all had, and then to suddenly hear that there's discussions of hiring 2 more sworn in police officers. Come on, like, really? Recently I had a friend of mine come and visit me, and we met in the Vasona Park. We were sitting on a blanket and we were social distanced and we were just talking. He is a African-American man, and the police came out twice. I personally have been to Vasona Park hundreds of times. I have never ever had a police car come driving through the parking lot, stop and stare at me. This happened twice, and we were just literally just sitting there. So that, yeah. Speaking as a person of color, I think that my experience might be different than your experience. Also, I do work in a restaurant, and I have to say that Alex Holt is a really great guy. Catherine, she also brought up the point that we need to come together as a community for our restaurants. We also are having trouble finding tents. We're having trouble finding propane. She's right. We need to come together as a community. We are the town of Los Gatos. We're a small town. We're a strong town, and we're a caring town. I really think that maybe, I'm not sure how you guys could get involved, how you could help. What we're finding out, or what I have found out by trying to help and try and find tents, is that they're all bought out. Anyone who owns a renting company went and bought everything, and they're forcing everybody to rent, and even they're sold out. So people are having a hard time keeping their businesses alive. So I don't know, maybe there's something to discuss there, something that maybe you guys could get involved with. But yeah, I mainly just wanted to say that I absolutely 100% agree with Jeff, and he did a really good job in explaining that. Thank you so much. I hope you guys are well.
Thank you, Alicia. Next person with their hand up is Mohsin Syed.
Peace and blessings, everyone. Actually, it's Kareem. Sorry, it's my son's Zoom number, so
hello.
that's why.
Hi.
That's why it comes out as that. But I just kind of wanted to echo what everyone else was talking about. I mean, I really appreciated last week's town council meeting regarding the police, and I also agree that I think one of the things we need to do is have more oversight over how those funds are being spent. I think the chief already has the vision of having more community engagement officers. So I think if we get creative with the funds we have to be able to do that, I think that would go a long way in, again, policing the way we want Los Gatos to be policed. And just I wanted to also echo what Catherine was speaking about. I think the town really needs to come together right now because of what we're all facing. And I think, her idea of having a task force, I think that would be very important, that we do come together as a community, have the leaders come together and come up with creative ways to support one another, to continue, making sure that everyone is staying healthy, but then also everyone's able to kind of manage the situation, especially when it comes to the businesses. But thank you, everyone. And I appreciate everyone's time on the council and Laurel and everyone. And thank you. And that's my time.
Thank you. Thanks for participating this evening. I don't see any other hands raised right now for verbal communications. And Ms. Neese, I'm going to make sure that you're seeing the same thing as me.
I am seeing the same thing as you.
Okay. So thank you for all who participated and gave us your input. We appreciate it. So we'll move on to our regular calendar, which now has 3 items on it. And we'll start with number 3, which was pulled from the consent calendar. We'll just take it as a normal public hearing. And I'm not sure who's going to give us the report on that. Mr. Betty, who's going to give us?
Joel will give us the report.
Mr. Paulson? Okay, Mr. Paulson, why don't you go ahead then, please?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Good evening. Good evening, Council. Joel Paulson, Community Development Director. The item that was pulled was for an extension of the arborist consultant agreement to coincide with our other arborist who was hired following the original recruitment due to retirement. So we're looking to have that RFP process coincide so that as we move forward, we can bring on 2 new arborists, or potentially retain the same ones. But it's really an extension for approximately 18 months, and that's what's before you this evening.
Okay, do we have any questions for Mr. Paulson from the council? Okay, seeing none. I'm assuming, Dr. Wiseman, that you want to speak on this item. I don't see your hand. And there it goes. So when you're ready, go ahead and unmute. You have 3 minutes.
You hear me okay?
Yes.
Thank you. At the December 19th, 2017 council meeting, I discussed the need for uniform standards for consulting arborist tree reports. By a 5-0 vote on an amendment offered by Council Member Sayoc, this council agreed that uniform arborist report standards were a good idea and should be a part of the next RFP. The town attorney also agreed that such standards were desirable. I recently asked Councilmember Sayoc if she knew, when she made her 2017 motion, that there would be a delay in implementation of these standards. She told me that she intended for this to be immediate, starting with the next RFP issued for a consulting arborist tree report. This immediate timeline was also verbally supported by Councilmember Spector at that same 2017 council meeting. By way of an aside, it is my understanding that an RFP for a tree report is sent out to the town's contracted consulting arborists each time such a tree report is required. Unfortunately, staff took this past motion to meet an RFP for arborist services, which is normally done only every 5 years. Nothing happened further until January 24th, 2019. When I brought this issue to the policy committee. At the subsequent February 26th policy committee meeting, staff's report indicated that staff would be developing written arborist report guidelines for the next consulting arborist RFP process, which staff said was scheduled for late summer 2020. Yet here we are tonight, a full 3 years after the council unanimously voted for uniform arborist report standards with nothing. And by asking the council to approve this First Amendment agreement, staff is effectively asking you to delay the uniform arborist standards for another 1.5 years, because this First Amendment will delay the next consulting arborist RFP process until May 2022. I thus request that you deny this proposed First Amendment agreement unless you also clearly instruct staff to immediately do what the council asked them to do 3 years ago. Revising the arborist tree report standards does not have to be linked to the consulting arborist RFP process. Should you desire not to tackle this issue tonight, then please feel free to pass the buck to the incoming council. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Weissman. Let's see if you have any questions. Mr. Rennie, I can't tell if you have your hand up or not. You do not. You're shaking your head. Okay, I don't see Councilwoman Sayoc.
I actually have a question. So to Mr. Paulson, I just want to make sure we are speaking from the same language. So this is not an RFP process, correct? This is an amendment to an existing agreement. So we would not be changing our criteria normally during an amendment. Is that correct?
So that's correct. We would not recommend changing it during an amendment period, but should the council feel that that is necessary to go forward separately, as Dr. Weissman mentioned, that's something staff can look at from a resource and staffing perspective on when we might be able to get that rolling.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, and I went to council questions because I didn't see any other person from the public who wanted to talk about this. I'll just make sure that I offer that opportunity and see if there's anyone else. Okay, I don't see anyone, so I'm going to close the public hearing. Council members, Vice Mayor.
Thank you. To staff, I do recall this issue of the standards and getting standards, and I even sort of remember Ms. Sayak's motion, and it has been 3 years. So what are your thoughts? Why isn't it done? What do we need to do?
So initially, as was mentioned, we planned on doing it through the RFP process, but we didn't want to go through 2 separate RFP processes. So we thought it best from a resource perspective to move that out so that the later date is the end date for Mr. Levinson. Again, should the council wish that we move this up the priority list, we can definitely take a look at that and see when we can start work on that effort.
And when you say that effort, you're talking about the RFP?
I would be talking about uniform tree guidelines, as Mr. Weissman has mentioned and was mentioned at councils previously.
And what would that look like, and what would the time frame be?
Don't know what that would look like. We would have to have staff do some investigation. I'm sure Dr. Weissman will provide us some information, and I know he's provided information in the past as well. So we'll resurrect that information and then see what the best mechanism is to get those in place, and then have our consulting arborists use those in the future. We probably will also consult with them as well to get input from them on these proposed guidelines.
Thank you.
Councilman Rennie.
I would just say this sounds like it's not a simple task, and we're not that far off from our next priority setting session, that maybe we just ask staff to remind us at the priority setting session for the new council to size this as they normally do, and let the new council prioritize it.
Okay, any other questions, comments, and/or a motion? Okay, I'm going to make a motion then to authorize the town manager to execute a First Amendment agreement for consultant services with Walter Levinson for arborist services as contained in attachment 1 of our staff report. On item 3, I agree with Councilman Rennie that if the new council wants to make a priority make it a priority to do standardized arborist standards, whatever they are, best practices. I think that that's up to them to do through its priority setting session. But we're not considering that tonight. So my motion is to approve this agreement. Seconded by Councilman Rennie. Any discussion on the motion? Ms. Spector?
I won't be able to support the motion, not because I don't want to give the new council the opportunity to establish objectives. That's a good idea. But because this has been an issue before us since 2017.
Okay. Any other questions? Any other comments before I call the question? Seeing none, Councilman Rennie?
Yes.
Councilwoman Sayoc?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Spector?
No.
Mayor votes yes. It passes 3-1. We'll then move to item 6, which is a discussion regarding vehicle miles traveled. And I think Ms. Smith, you're going to be doing the report for us tonight. And we're also joined by, I believe, 2 consultants from Fair and Peers. So Ms. Smith, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, and Council members. Ying Smith, Transportation and Mobility Manager. This evening, we'll present to you major progress on the CEQA transportation analysis transition work. I will tag team with Dan Rubens of Fair and Peers, and Charlie Coles is also available to answer your questions. The last time you heard this item was back in February 2000, early this year, February. And in July, the project team completed a very important document. And I need to be able to share screen, sorry. It's called SB 743 Implementation Decisions for the Town of Los Gatos. This document is available online on the website. The staff report details the additional analyses since the completion of this document. All the work completed since the beginning of this project provides the technical background to support the staff recommendation. The screen sharing is not enabled.
Ms. Neese, can you help us out there, possibly?
Yes, I'm looking at the settings. One moment, please.
Thank you. While we are waiting for that, and I just want to speak just an introduction to Dan Rubens. He's a senior associate with the Fair and Peers, who has been hired by the town to help us in the VMT transition work. And Fair and Peers is also the transportation consultant on the general plan update team.
Mr. Rubens, welcome and go ahead.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor and members of the council. I do not see the presentation yet.
No, it's not available yet. And I'm wondering if...
Ying?
Yes.
It appears as if we're not going to be able to provide you with share screen status. So I'm going to go ahead and put up the PDF version. If Mr. Rubens could just let me know how he would like me to proceed through the slides, I'll go ahead and guide them.
Thank you, Mr. Andrews.
Good. So, yeah, Ms. Andrews, if you can fast forward to the next slide, that'd be great. So as a lead agency, the town will need to make 4 key policy decisions in this VMT transition work. So tonight, we will be presenting to you the most substantive decision that the town must make, which is setting the local CEQA VMT thresholds of significance. Related to the thresholds, the other 2 decisions, VMT metrics and calculation methods, the decisions also will be made as part of your consideration tonight. The next slide, please. This one just want to give you overview of the topics we're going to cover tonight. And again, Dan will walk through those the background with you as well as the staff recommendation. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Dan. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Ying. If you can go to the next slide, please. So I'm going to start with just an overview of Senate Bill 743. These are slides that you would have seen in February, but just wanted to provide a quick reminder. So Senate Bill 743 was signed into law in September 27th of 2013 by Governor Jerry Brown. Its legislative intent had two purposes. It changed how we would do environmental analysis for transportation for CEQA purposes, and it was to align the CEQA analysis with several state goals, including infill development, active transportation, and reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. Next slide, please. So what Senate Bill 743 does is it removes vehicle level of service or vehicle delay as the basis for determining a significant environmental impact. It recommends the use of vehicle miles traveled as the most appropriate measure for transportation analysis. And as I noted in the previous slide, it has considerations for transit and non-motorized travel. It does not change how you go about your planning and design and review processes. It only has a change to the CEQA process, the California Environmental Quality Act process. It does not change the general plan or congestion management processes, two very important parts that the town considers at times. And it does not change the CEQA disclosure standards to make a good faith effort to disclose the potential impacts and benefits of a project. Next slide, please. We're at the beginning of the process for Senate Bill 743. Now it is 7 years in, but it's still the beginning of a different type of analysis. And there's three kind of main components that are available to us in this implementation process right now. It's the state legislation that I just mentioned, which sets the intent and goals. There was in the end of 2018, an update to the CEQA statutory law, which sets the legal requirements for an adequate environmental analysis. And then there also was the development of a technical advisory by the California Office of Planning and Research. This offers advice for compliance from the state's perspective. And that advice was primarily focused on CEQA relief process for projects that were supportive of state goals. One of the main items was locating office and residential in low VMT generating areas. By the nature of the town of Los Gatos being on the edge of the urban area, it has a different context. You tend to generate more VMT on average than the county and region. So with the next slide, we've been working with city staff to present different options for 4 key decisions: the VMT metric, the VMT calculation method, the VMT thresholds, and the VMT mitigation actions. The first 2 are technical elements that you can look at in the document package. What we're going to focus on tonight is the VMT thresholds and the mitigation. So if we can go to the next slide, please. And specifically, we're focused on 2 questions: establishing VMT thresholds for land use projects and plans under baseline and existing condition, and under a cumulative condition. So those are the 2 questions that we're focused on tonight. Next slide, please. And as Ying had mentioned, in February, we came with 2 possible paths forward for establishing those VMT thresholds. The first was to consider and apply the Office of Planning and Research technical advisory thresholds, or to set thresholds consistent with the general plan based off of your future VMT projections. You selected option 2 and provided direction to also include stretch goals to reduce VMT in the town of Los Gatos. So we have focused on 4 options. Before I jump into those options, I wanted to just take a moment, next slide please, to describe the 2 VMT metrics that I'll mention in this presentation. The first is the project generated VMT. Now, it would be good to think of VMT at the town level. So this is all the VMT that's generated for a single day. In the town, you have trips that travel from one location to another in the town. So we would include that VMT, plus the VMT that starts outside of the town and ends in the town, and the VMT that starts in the town and leaves. So items 1, 2, and 3 on the left. We're not including the VMT that travels through. This is the primary metric that I'll be describing the VMT thresholds in, but there is one threshold that we will be using, the metric on the right. This is the boundary VMT. It's all the VMT that's on the city streets within the boundary. And if we go to the next slide, it might be easier to kind of visualize that. The left is the project generated VMT, but relative to the city streets and your sphere of influence. On the right, the boundary VMT would be all the yellow highlighted streets and the freeway. So with those two VMT metrics in mind, we'll go to the next slide and focus on the thresholds. Now, these percentages were presented in your staff report. We're just presenting them in a slightly different way to make a couple key points. The first point is on the left is the project generated VMT rate of reduction. As you take a greater reduction in your VMT generation rate, there would be less VMT generated by the town of Los Gatos. So the 4 scenarios start with the top line, which is very close to what your general plan projections would have of no VMT reduction. So we would establish a bracket of your existing VMT generation and your future VMT generation would be treated the same. That would result in about a 20% increase in the baseline VMT. So from existing conditions, your town VMT would increase by about 20% based on your projected residential and employment land use growth. At the bottom end, option 4 is the greatest reduction. In that scenario, with a 16.7% reduction in the VMT generation for the town, that would result in no additional VMT generated by the town. So those are the 2 brackets. In between are 2 scenarios that are supportive of the state goals for greenhouse gas emissions, expressed slightly differently. Option 2, which is the one that staff has presented in the recommendation, is to allow an up to 6.5% increase in the town's VMT generation. That would mean an 11.3% reduction in the VMT generation rate. Option 3 is another way to look at the state goal. In this case, it would be the 14.3% reduction. Both of them would allow for a small amount of growth on generated by the town. So we can go to the next slide. One other concept I wanted to connect was, as you're taking additional VMT reductions, there's a number of VMT mitigation actions that you would need to take. And they're really grouped into kind of 3 major parts. Transportation demand management with a transportation and management association. So it scales transportation demand management to a community level. Site design, and then regional policies. So if we're looking at option 1, that option, since it's close to what your general plan is, you can apply TDM to, say, future office development, site design improvements to that future office development, and support regional transportation transit solutions, and still achieve the 0% generation rate in VMT. However, as you move to options 2, 3, and 4, the VMT mitigation would need to apply to not only future development, but some amount of existing development. What that would look like would be scaling VMT mitigation that applies, say, a community shuttle that serves existing and future residents. So you can reduce the VMT from existing and future residents. Site design of a community scale that would implement things like your Connect Los Gatos, so your priority bike and ped transportation improvements, and regional policies such as the State Route 85 express lanes. And as you increase the amount of reduction, you need to do that and more. So I just want to connect those concepts of, as you take more reduction, you need to make potentially more adjustments to the amount of VMT mitigation you would apply. Next slide, please. So I just want to take a moment and those options 2 and 3, where did that 6.5% come from? It comes from a statewide scenario. So this is a graph that is showing the population growth for the entire state out to 2050. What California Air Resources Board did is, in a part of their 2017 scoping plan, they basically figured out how much VMT growth can there be and we still achieve our GHG targets for the state. So with a 24% increase in the population of California, there's still the option or the ability for a 6.5% increase in the VMT generated. So that's that green line. So that's where the 6.5% comes from. If there isn't a VMT reduction, and VMT just continued on to the baseline condition, it would be that red kind of increasing line. So that's where the 6.5% comes from. If we look at, in the next slide, the VMT expressed as a total VMT per service population, this is where the 14.3% comes from. So if we look at what the state reduction needs to be, the 14.3% is what's needed by 2050. So all residents would need to reduce by 14.3%. So let's turn back to the town of Los Gatos. So in the next slide, there's 3 components to a threshold, a VMT threshold. The first is the VMT metric. In this case, it's the total VMT per service population. The second component of a threshold is the percent reduction. In this case, we're expressing from option 2, the 11.3%. For a reduction, we need to apply it to something. This would be the baseline average of the town. So the full threshold would be the total VMT per service population that's 11.3% below the baseline average of the town, which may be a reasonable threshold. So now if we take a step to the bottom part of this graphic, what we can see is the town of Los Gatos is the green bars in 2015 and 2040. The red bar is Santa Clara County, and the blue bar is the region. So this shows how in 2015 and 2040, the town of Los Gatos generates VMT at a greater rate than the county or region. We also see that the town of Los Gatos VMT generation rates actually increasing from 2015 to 2040, from 33.6 to 34.5. So taking the quote above, the threshold would be on the green bar on the left, the solid white line, the first line, would be the level that the threshold would be established at. So if we go to the next slide. Just wanted to mention the other way of looking at VMT, which was the boundary VMT, the amount that's on the city streets, or the town streets, sorry. What's occurring? In the town of Los Gatos, from 2015 to 2040, you see an increase from the 1.1 million, almost 1.2 million, to 1.3 million. So to achieve just a 6.5% increase, it's not quite in the middle, but you'd have to reduce the amount of VMT that's on the town streets. So go to the next slide, and this is where there's a lot of detail in these following slides. So I'm just going to take a moment to just describe the first set of thresholds, but you can reference the staff report for the remaining baseline thresholds and cumulative thresholds for land use plans and projects. So what we're focused on here is what the thresholds would be for a land use project. When considering a land use project, your discretionary action ultimately leads to the construction of a project. So we're looking at 2 things when using VMT. The first is what the project impact is, what its direct impact is by how much VMT it generates compared to the threshold. So the significant impact would occur if the total VMT per service population for the project would exceed a level of 11.3% below the total VMT service population for the town of Los Gatos baseline condition. So that's the threshold. Expressed that several times in slides before. The second part of the impact analysis is to look at the full effects of a project. The project impact is really looking at how much VMT is generated at a specific location. The full effects is not only how much is generated, but what other shifts might happen to the VMT on the roadway system. So that significant impact would occur if the project increases total boundary VMT countywide by 6.5% compared to baseline conditions. Now we use these same thresholds for land use plans and land use projects. There's slight differences, but the reason for it is, for example, the land use projects are really looking into the future. So we focused more on the project's effect than we do on the project impacts. So that rounds out the thresholds. I'm happy to go back to the other ones for land use plans and for cumulative thresholds, should the council want to discuss those more. But I will give this back to Ying.
Thank you, Dan. Mr. Andrews, maybe we can fast forward to slide 22, please. Then walk you through the steps we got to this point. And so in summary, the project team can evaluate these 4 options to set the thresholds of significance. And our recommendation is for the town council to adopt option 2, which we'll highlight here, to establish the sequence threshold and to comply with SB 743. The thresholds in details are described in the staff report as well as in resolution, in the attached resolution. And the next 2 slides, number 24. So we want to just give you kind of look ahead of what else with other remaining tasks to wrap up the entire SEQA transportation analysis transition. There are a few more steps remaining, and all of them are listed here, and they are closely related to the general plan update. And so next year we'll come back with the additional work, but tonight's decision is really the most important one, is to adopt the threshold. This concludes our presentation, and we're here to answer your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Smith and Mr. Rubens. Appreciate it. So Council, I don't know if you want to ask questions now, or let me see if there's anybody in the public that wants to talk to us and then ask our questions. How do you want to proceed? Are there preliminary questions you need to have answered before we see if there's members of the public that want to talk? Okay, I'm seeing kind of no's on that. Are there any members of the public that want to talk to us about setting significant thresholds for vehicle miles traveled? And raise your blue hand if you do. I'll give it just a few seconds, see. Okay, I am not seeing anyone, so I'm going to close the public portion of the meeting. And now look to Council for your questions. Mr. Benny.
So Mayor, I have 2 pages of questions. I don't know if you want me to do some of them. And
oh my gosh. Why don't we not do 2 pages of questions? Why don't we see if we can break it up? I don't know that we can go by category. Let me just try to ask a couple of really preliminary questions, and then if we do get to the 2 pages, so be it. So Ms. Smith or Mr. Rubens, just basically and preliminarily, why is it in Los Gatos that our VMT is projected to go up? Is that a population factor? Is that a job growth factor? Is that due to the fact that we don't have a transportation network? Is that due to the way our town is planned? So I'm trying to look at this from, if the general plan and land use designations are interrelated to VMT and impacts on VMT, I want to understand, why is it that ours are going up, and what should the general plan potentially look like if my goal is to get them to go down? So that's just kind of a preliminary question.
Yeah, and you gave really good examples as to why it's actually going up. So there's two main components to VMT. It is the land use and the transportation network. And what's happening in the town of Los Gatos is that over time, the land use growth is at a different rate than it is for the remainder of the region. So you're traveling more over time because of that land use change. It also is that you're primarily using vehicles to travel. So there isn't a lot of changes in the transportation network that offer opportunities for travel other than by vehicle. So it's ultimately a number of different things that are happening at the same time, but the trend is increasing the VMT generation rate.
Okay, to follow up on that, and then I'll open it up. And if everybody's got 2 pages, go for it. So if I am now working on Los Gatos 2040 general plan, and I recognize those deficiencies that you just talked about, Mr. Rubens, and that a transportation network or alternative transportation doesn't exist now, but I want to create a policy document that, if it does change, allows it to change so that I can get those vehicle miles traveled down. So how would I construct a policy document that recognizes, okay, well, the existing conditions are, you call them baseline or X, but I want to be able to have something that's flexible enough to, if there's new technology, if there's something that comes in, that the document says, great, it's ready for us to implement that. How would that look?
Yeah, so at a policy level, you would be thinking about kind of 3 main kind of buckets for how to affect VMT. First is around transportation demand management, so affecting change for new office development, offering other transportation options other than a vehicle. That may also look at changing your parking requirements. The second kind of bucket would be, and that would have, I should say, in terms of effectiveness, it has some effect, but that's only for very specific land use types. As we move to the next bucket, there's more effectiveness, more potential effectiveness, and that is site design of individual projects, but also of your transportation network. So as I mentioned, the Connect Los Gatos, providing opportunities to travel by bicycle and pedestrians for a broader spectrum of people, other than just those that are very advanced, but more that are less advanced in their ability to use a bike or to walk. So that would take the form of community scale, bike ped transportation improvements. Parking would again be another key component of that. And then the third component, which I refer to as regional transportation policies, but in the context of what the town of Los Gatos can do, it's the most effective, is around your land use mix and policies that would affect travel cost. And that scale might be more of charging for parking, that sort of thing. So that would be kind of the spectrum. There's many other options within those groups, but those are a handful of examples.
Okay, thanks very much. More generalized questions before we get to the particulars. Vice Mayor.
Thank you. To Mr. Rubens also. I'm looking at page 6 of 9 of our staff report. It shows 33.6. As I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, as I understand it, that number is fairly high because it reflects the fact that people in Los Gatos travel somewhere else to work and then come back. Is that accurate, or can you help me out here?
Yes, that's one of the reasons the town of Los Gatos is on the edge of the Silicon Valley. So you travel further to get to jobs. It also is other travel purposes like recreational or shopping. Those trips are also captured. So while some of that activity occurs in the town of Los Gatos, it also occurs by traveling out of the town as well.
All right, then when you go to staff's recommended line item 2, there's a 29.8. Is that because, it's It hasn't dropped way down. If I'm reading this right, yeah. It hasn't dropped way down. And is that because, sort of related to Ms. Jensen's question, is that because there's more people and they're still traveling outside of town to work?
Yeah, so I'm sorry, so the 29.8, I think that's the number you just quoted. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yep. Yes, so that is an 11.3% reduction in the generation rate. So there would still be the pattern of most people traveling further to work, but what would happen with that reduction is more people would carpool, take transit, or some other alternative mode that didn't increase VMT. Also for kind of other activities like shopping and recreation, there would be more carpooling or use of bike, that sort of thing.
Thank you.
Okay, general questions before I go to Mr. Rennie. Councilwoman Sarah.
So Mr. Rubens, I'm going to ask about, continue that line of questioning. So you mentioned about the policies we can incorporate into our general plan as we look into the 2040. And I'm looking at the mitigation actions that you had proposed in, I don't know what page that is, but it's 100, I can't tell, it's too small. So the mitigation actions in there, and you point out a couple of examples, and it said program level as well as project. Is it best to incorporate those early on as policy so that we can get to that reduction? Or are these strictly things that you think are after the fact?
Yeah, I think when we're talking about your general plan, it's your overarching policies, right? And your general plan can have the goals of reducing VMT and indicate the types of policies around transportation, demand management, site design, and regional policies. The question ultimately becomes how much of that's in your general plan and how much of that's determined afterwards when you see what the environmental impact is. So there may be a process in your general plan EIR that's, a specification in your general plan. You have certain policies stated. We determine if there would be an environmental impact based on this VMT threshold. If there is, we would talk about additional VMT mitigation. So maybe it's an enhanced list of what we've already presented. And if needed, talk about VMT programs as well.
Okay, and then if I may just follow up on that, Mayor, it's more to staff. I just want to make sure I understand how the process works, what comes first, because I recall when we were talking about some other projects like North 40, we couldn't necessarily put conditions on there on programs we had not started. And so if I'm looking at some of these suggestions like a impact fee program, a VMT mitigation bank, an exchange, can we require these as mitigation if they're not stated up front? Like, do we have to create these policies first before any future project would be required to follow this as mitigation?
I'm going to start answering the question. Maybe Dan can also help explain more. Some of the examples you mentioned, they are going to be town-wide, like a VMT mitigation bank or reduce our traffic impact fee policy so it will be based on VMT. Those will be town-wide and rather than development specific. And our experience is if we take a town-wide approach, we'll see better results, will be more effective. And the same logic applies if the region takes a bigger approach. So some of the examples you mentioned, there will be something the town will have to move forward to look at those policy decisions and some programs and to achieve, to get us closer to this threshold. And then I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, I'd say that when we would start to talk about VMT mitigation, banks, exchanges, those types of VMT programs would be during the environmental analysis of the general plan. If there's a VMT impact, we're going to look at all feasible mitigation, and that's one possible group of mitigations.
Okay, but it takes place during the EIR review then?
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, I'm going to move to Mr. Rennie.
So as usual, I have trouble getting my head around this whole VMT thing every last time. I want to start with just the basic. So we're being asked to choose from the 4 levels, and staff's recommending level number 2. But in choosing, are we setting up to say when we reject a project, or are we just setting up how much mitigation we're asking a project to do?
So you're setting a threshold that's based off of kind of environmental effects, and CEQA is a disclosure process. So the threshold is being used to determine what would ultimately be good or bad VMT. And if you're above the threshold, that's bad, that has an environmental effect, you disclose that potential effect. If it's below the threshold, then it's potentially a good thing for the environment, and so it wouldn't have an impact. So the comparison and the use of the threshold is meant to just disclose the potential effects of the project on the environment.
But so from a high level philosophical standpoint, that makes sense. I'm trying to think about the practical standpoint. What's going to happen when a project comes forward? For the environment, I would want to choose option 4 because that's the best one, right? But would that end up in us rejecting all the projects, or setting mitigation that's not even a mitigation level that's not even possible? And that's what I'm trying to understand here.
Yeah, and that's a challenging piece. You're kind of starting to get into some policy elements as well of your general plan.
So, I'm sorry, Mr. Rubens. I was going to maybe ask the policy person, Ms. Pavetti, maybe you can give us some insight on that because of or Mr. Schultz, because you have more knowledge about how we look at projects to answer this question. And then Mr. Rubens can step in if he needs to.
Yes, thank you. I think it's important that we're setting CEQA thresholds. So it's really, when do we have a significant environmental impact for CEQA purposes? So if we set the threshold too aggressively, then everything's going to have a significant environmental impact. And our ability to reduce that significant environmental impact, even with mitigation, becomes very, very challenging. So it's not a matter of whether or not the council or the planning commission ultimately approve the project. It's really, from a CEQA perspective, are we able to mitigate to reduce that impact to a less than significant level? If we choose option 4, what we might find is that the council is going to be adopting resolutions of findings of overriding considerations, because we're always going to have a VMT impact. We're never going to be able to do it. You can still approve the project and you can still ask for mitigation, but you may never achieve what you're seeking. And I think what staff is trying to do is find a threshold that meets the CARB, meets the California Air Resources Board's objectives and state law, but is realistic given our constraints. We can still seek mitigation and try and reduce the impacts as much as we can. But again, when you consider a land use application, you're not just accepting or rejecting an application based on its transportation impacts.
But you use the words reduce them as much as we can. We could always do that with option 4. In the beginning of your explanation, you were saying what we really want to do is be able to give mitigation that can get it out of the significant category when we accept the project.
Right. I mean, again, we want realistic thresholds, because otherwise everything's going to have a significant, unavoidable impact. You're not going to be able to mitigate. You can still ask for mitigations, but you're not going to really drive that difference. And so I think that's why, option 2 provides us with really the best option for figuring out a realistic threshold for us, and then still getting the mitigation measures that we need. And I would imagine that if developers saw that we chose option 2, they're going to try and build in mitigation measures up front into their project so they don't have a significant impact. So you're already going to be driving behavior changes by choosing an option other than option 1. And I'll defer to others on
Mr. Rubens or Ms. Smith, anything to add to that, or Mr. Schultz?
If I may just add another explanation on option 4, it's a reference we look at, but this is similar to the Caltrans draft guidelines for state highway projects.
And Ms. Smith, your audio is not good. So
it's better, or
it's just got some kind of buzz happening.
Oh, okay. I apologize. And I'm going to try again. So this references to Caltrans on the threshold for state highway projects. It's more appropriate for transmission projects because it says that the net zero concept. It may not be the best option for land use projects or land use plans.
Okay, I think that those were good answers that actually knocked off several of my questions. If I could move to a different question. It's about how we might address, so any parcel that's mostly bare land, like the North 20 of the North 40, is starting with a 0 baseline. So anything we add is going to have 100% increase in baseline VMT, and our VMT rate is pretty much going to be 100% also. So how do we deal with a project like that?
Yeah, so you're going to look at several things, and I might direct you to, give me just a second here, the list of thresholds, table 2 in the staff report.
On page 6 of 9?
8 of 9.
Okay.
Yep. So you gave the example of a project land use. So what we would do is we would look at the project impact. So for that 20 acres of the North 40, we would assume that it would generate a similar rate as other development in the area, and compare that to the threshold to determine if there would be an impact. We haven't done that test, so we don't know actually the answer to that to the moment. We'd also test what the effects of adding what you described, the additional VMT to the roadway system. Does it lead to an increase of 6.5% or more on the roadway system? If it does, there would be a project's effect on VMT. So those two different tests. One is, what is the generation rate? Is it higher or lower than the threshold we've established? The second is, how much VMT has it added to the roadway system? And is it more than 6.5%?
Okay, that's interesting. If I could go to a sort of a second kind of example. So we have a proposal in our general plan updates for these opportunities areas, which imply that much of our housing element housing is going to be added over existing commercial. So again, it sounds like we're keeping the commercial we have and we're adding a whole bunch to it. In order to get down into a reasonable rate, or what's going to happen? Are we going to say you got to have to reduce your commercial so that you remove something from the baseline so that when we add this tons of housing over the top, we stay within a reasonable rate and a reasonable addition, or are we going to be able to come up with enough mitigation?
Yeah, it's probably the combination. And I didn't mention this in the details of the rates in 2040, but we are capturing your kind of initial land use scenario for your general plan. So including the residential you just described in that growth. We haven't included any additional RENA requirements, but that's the starting point. So land use changes, increasing the density and diversity of land use is one way to reduce the VMT rate. The other is provide other transportation options. So that could be things like extending of light rail, those sorts of things into Los Gatos.
Okay, Mr. Rennie, do you have more questions?
I do. On page 138 of our report, which if I recall, I think it was Roman numeral 13 of the FAIRS report, it talks about impact screening. And what the way I read that is certain we will maybe determine, are we going to use impact screening, and does it work the way it sounds like to me, where we say certain housing element projects that come our way fall within the screen, and so they don't have to meet whatever option we come up, let's say option 2 at the 6.5% increase. Or how does that work? And is the plan for us to use this VMT screening?
Yeah, I miss exactly where you're referring to, but I understand where you're at in the more detailed document package where we describe.
Yeah, there's a table, and it seems to be Roman numeral 3, page Roman numeral 13, and it's a table that starts with summary of SB 743 decision options and recommendations, and there's issues of VMT impact screening desired. Yes, that's it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Yes, so this was something that was a part of option 1 back in February, where OPR has and relies largely on screening approaches for different project types to provide CEQA relief. The main one that we would consider for the town of Los Gatos would be, would office or residential be located in low VMT generation areas? And with what we have seen that's been produced by the Valley Transportation Authority, VTA, and their maps, that the town of Los Gatos is in an area where the VMT generation rates are so high that you wouldn't have much benefit for screening out. So that's actually one of the reasons why there was the presentation of option 2. Now, some of the others.
I'm sorry, Mr. Williams, can I just follow up on that? The impact screening, isn't that basically a choice where we exempt certain projects that the state deems to be desirable, for example, a transit oriented, whatever, and we say, okay, we're not going to count that for, it's a choice to exempt things to screen out things that are, quote, desirable, unquote. Is that right? And we didn't choose that option?
Correct. And I will note that of the list on the far right, there's 6 bullets of possible screening items. 2 of them are actually in the statutory law. They are the, that's small enough, the projects in proximity to major transit stops and affordable housing. Those are actually in the statutory law. The other ones are ones that OPR presented in their technical advisory.
Okay, sorry, Mr. Rennie. I just wanted to make sure we understood what that was.
The question, so it sounds like we decided not to use this option, but we're already using a hybrid of it because 2 of the items occur anyway. And could we choose to add a hybrid of some of these into screening, or is that ship sailed already?
You could. I think it's one of those providing the evidence to support the threshold or the screening that you might be considering.
In other words, we'd have to develop evidence for a standard?
Yes.
So related to this, if I could go to our staff report, page 7 of 9, the second paragraph is talking about if a project is inconsistent with our planned Bay Area. And that paragraph's not worded very well, so I don't completely understand what it's saying. I was wondering if it's saying if a project is part of our planned Bay Area, then it also might fall into a screen or not be subject to the 6.5 that we chose, for example. Could somebody explain this paragraph to me a little better, please?
Yeah, I can do that. So and this would be something we're thinking about under cumulative conditions, is the amount of land use that is in the town of Los Gatos and the transportation network, there's been assumptions that are already in the Plan Bay Area Regional Transportation Plan, Sustainable Community Strategies Plan. And so the test is, would, under cumulative conditions, say when you have your new general plan, would you increase the amount of VMT that would be on the regional roadway system or not? If you don't, then you would be considered consistent with your general plan, or what, I'm sorry, with the regional transportation plan and SCS.
But we said early on, Los Gatos is supposed to increase. So it's, if we, we're increasing more than, remember at the beginning of the presentation, we talked about in the Bay Area, our VMT, the VMT is going down, but in Los Gatos, it's actually going up. So that going up, is that part of the Plan Bay Area then? And so it's not really a zero, it's a whatever they've set that we're supposed to go up by, that we're trying to stay under. I know I didn't answer very well.
I think I understand where you were headed. It's how much of the Los Gatos General Plan VMT is already in the Regional Transportation Plan SCS. I think that's your question.
Yeah. Yes.
Right. We haven't actually looked at that specifically, but that's something we would look at in the actual environmental document for the general plan. So it should include at the moment your current general plan and transportation network.
I'm wondering if I can use a transportation example to kind of show that point. For example, if we'll consider project that widen the roads that would create a lot of additional automobile throughput, that will trigger our VMT and greenhouse gas emission to be higher, to be inconsistent with the Plan Bay Area. And so that would be considered having a significant impact.
Okay, so that's the case when we would do that test, is like a transportation project, for example. Okay.
Correct.
I think my last question was really about mitigation on 138, which or 134, page 9, Roman numeral 9. But I think you said we're going to work on mitigation choices in the future.
Yes, that will be part of when we do the general plan update CEQA clearance.
So I'll not ask that question and end my questions here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Rennie. So Council, any other questions, keeping in mind that what we're being asked to do tonight is just set these significance thresholds that can be found on page 5 of 9 of our staff report. Staff is recommending number 2, which recognizes some growth. It doesn't go all the way to zero growth, and it doesn't reach toward, as you know, it's not a huge reach. It's a little bit of reach. We've been told that the significance threshold is really the point at which one determines in an EIR that there is a significant impact that cannot be mitigated. So what we're looking at is that where we want to go given what our current land use is, or do we want to try to strive for something different, recognizing that we have to plan for it and that we may run into difficulty with the EIR that says everything has a significant non-mitigatable impact. So that's not a super great explanation, but I want to get us back to considering those options that are on page 5. So any kind of questions or discussion about those options? Councilwoman Sayoc.
Thank you. So I'm comfortable with the recommendation. The question I have to town staff is, given the original direction that, yes, we understand this is our baseline, this is where we'd like to be for that CEQA clearance, but is there anything that prevents us from including language that, of course, we want to be, we want to stretch ourselves even further? Like if we agree to option 2, is there anything that prevents us from pushing future development so that we get even further reductions.
So who can answer that for us?
Yeah.
Why don't I start with that?
Okay.
Matt Morley, Director of Parks and Public Works, and chime in here at the end. That there is an opportunity to manage that, and we do that through our traffic impact policies as we develop those. So that will come at a later stage, and there'll be opportunities for you to weigh both the conversation on level of service and what that looks like for local streets, and then other measures that you might want to take or prioritize even for development locally, and what those mitigation measures might look like.
Okay, thank you. And then
Okay.
my next question related to either the town attorney or Ms. Pravetti, understanding how future development, we're now limited to very objective criteria under the Housing Affordability Act. Again, if we set option 2, but yet with all these policies that Director Morley said, is there anything that would tie our hands from pushing and stretching to go towards more reductions?
Not at all. In fact, the draft general plan reinforces the direction that the council is having tonight in terms of making sure that we do reduce VMT to the extent that we can. And there are policies in the draft plan that attempt to get there. And as Director Morley said, we'll be able to refine those in terms of specific implementation options for you later on in 2021 as we work through those policy updates. So we've got a framework. I think it's really about making sure that our goals are clear. And then as development comes in, staff will work with the applicants to try and drive as much innovation as we can get.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Schultz, did you have something to add?
No, I didn't. They're just,
Okay,
yeah,
you just
they're
came,
completely,
you came on the camera. Okay.
Yep.
Other questions or discussions, Mr. Rennie?
Question for Mr. Schultz. So in dealing with our North 40, I recall, we talk about they have to meet all the objective standards, but I recall there are triggers where if they have enough affordable housing, they can now ask for some number of exceptions, maybe height or setback or something like that, and get it by right kind of thing. Is the VMT mitigation something that they could ask for as one of the exceptions to not meet mitigation that we require?
no, that's not my understanding. They can ask, just as you mentioned, they can ask for exemptions and waivers from our code requirements, but not for mitigation measures under CEQA.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, other questions, discussion, or if anyone's ready for a motion? Councilwoman Sayoc.
I'm ready for a motion. I move we adopt the resolution contained in the staff report designating the use of vehicle miles traveled as the metric for conducting transportation analysis pursuant to CEQA and establishing the thresholds contained in the staff report at what we're calling recommendation number 2, but understanding that future policies and work will be towards stretching our own growth towards further reductions.
Okay, thank you. Is there a second, Vice Mayor?
I'm going to second the motion and thank staff for their explanation of this issue and the consultant.
Okay, any other discussion or comments on the motion, Mr. Rennie?
I'll just say that I'm going to support the motion, and I think the piece of information I got that really helped me the most was originally I was thinking, well, why don't we just set it up, at a more difficult level to try to get more, be more environmental and get more mitigation. But the idea that we would get projects where we couldn't fully mitigate and then we'd have to come up with exceptions, I think is a reasonable reason to set it at a reasonable level versus pushing for more. And as Councilmember Sayoc, we're looking for ways to drive more without sending a project into unable to mitigate significant effects. So I'll support the project, the recommendation 2 as the motion says, and see how it goes in the future.
Thank you. I'll just chime in that I will support the motion and thank staff and our consultants for giving us such a comprehensive report and answering our questions. To me, the most important thing is how does this integrate with how do we set up our general plan for the future, and how we do try to now work towards reaching those goals that were explained, what we need to do, get a better transportation network, get a better land use mix so that we can reduce those vehicle miles traveled that are now driving our increase. And I think if our policy document for our general plan reflects our goals, that we can get there. And I think this is a realistic goal, but I just want to echo that I think that we do want to look for every opportunity to where we can push this envelope and get mitigation where we can. And so that could come from a mixed use, a development that has transit passes. It could come from, employment, different kind of employment setups. It could come from multimodal transportation. So I want to make sure that our next discussion and our documents on general plan do reflect the discussions that we're having now, so that this can be a realistic goal and get better in the future. So with that, I'm going to look to the council and take a roll call vote on the motion, and starting with Councilwoman Sayoc.
Yes.
Vice Mayor?
Yes.
Councilman Rennie?
Yes.
And the mayor votes yes, so that passes unanimously. Thank you, consultants and staff, for that presentation tonight. Appreciate it. Okay, which we're going to try to plow through. The council's kind of been at it for a while, but we're going to try to do this. Which brings us to our last item, which is number 7. And to my mind, this is interrelated with our previous discussion. Like, how do we structure our general plan to look at our housing goals, our land use goals, because this came up at general plan, and a general plan committee was really looking for some direction. How does our plan, or how should our plan, incorporate those things that the council has already adopted and those goals that the GPAC has sent through Planning Commission and Council? So with that, Ms. Armour.
Yes, good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, council members. Jennifer Armour, Senior Planner. The item in front of you is an initial discussion of the initial draft land use and community design elements of the general plan. The General Plan Update Advisory Committee, the GPAC, is in the process of reviewing these elements. And this evening's meeting is an opportunity for the Town Council to provide direction to the GPAC, to staff, and to the consultant on the translation of the approved preferred land use alternative framework from last April into these general plan elements. So this concludes staff's presentation, but I'd be happy to answer it.
Thank you, Ms. Armour. Preliminary questions for Ms. Armour, or should I go and see if there's anyone in the public that wants to talk to us about this, council? All right, I'm going to look to see if anybody of our attendees wants to address the council. I am not seeing anyone. I do see Ms. Quintana, who is a participant. We did receive your communication. Thank you very much. So with that on the record, I don't see any hands raised, so I am going to close the public portion of the hearing and now look to the council for discussion and questions, but I'd also direct the council to page 5 of 6 of our staff report, which has got some questions for us just to direct our discussion. Mr. Rennie.
So I did have 1 or 2 questions. I think it might have been Mrs. Quintana's letter that prompted this. But, so we're talking about missing middle housing that goes in. I think really the concern is outside our opportunity areas if we start allowing that, and that seems to be a potential proposal. How do we hide the bulk and mass of a missing middle type housing project? You see lots of, I've seen lots of pictures of ones that do that. My concern is, the by right, that somebody just brings a project and we have to let them build it, but there could have been a better way to build the same thing, but have it hidden in the neighborhood better, shall I say. can we add to, our guidelines, are, well, more than guidelines, our code or so forth, to get to that? And I'll just add, normally what happens is we are able to use a lot of discretion. A project comes forward and we say, well, you need to articulate a little bit. You need to have some trees in front. You need to move this back. I worry about the by rights that can come forward, and we don't have the ability to easily tweak a project as much. What can we do to make sure these fit in better?
Thank you, Councilmember Rennie. I'll start, and then if Ms. Armour or Ms. Pravetti have anything additional. I think it's a couple items. One is there are opportunities, and I know there's been a lot of comments and concerns about significantly changing existing single-family neighborhoods from a mass and scale perspective, as you stated. I think with the general plan, you set up opportunities for these different types of housing units than we currently would allow. And then what controls that form is really our zoning code in terms of height, setbacks. We can look at potential additional guidelines for residential units. I think the goal from my perspective, specifically in, let's say, the low density residential, the state laws currently allow you to have up to 3 units with the single family home and then 2 accessory dwelling units. And so this is going to be something akin to that, but the way we control kind of that concern from a mass and scale perspective is through zoning code requirements primarily. And then the second piece is there may be some conversations as we move forward with future zoning code amendments to say, well, we really need to maybe modify a setback or a height a little bit, or maybe an FAR a little bit, so that we can accommodate, like we've done already with ADUs, we've given an increase for those units. So those are things I think that will come down the line on that note. And as you mentioned, in many neighborhoods, there are not exclusively single family homes, and there's homes that are broke up into multiple apartment units. And so they still fit in the general character, but they ultimately are higher density than would otherwise necessarily be allowed.
And I would add maybe a comment to that before I ask my second question. You mentioned heights and setbacks, and I don't feel like that's enough to achieve it, especially if it comes in as a by right. I'll just say that my street in the Almond Grove on Masal, if you walk down the street, it feels like a single family neighborhood. But you'll be surprised that in the 3 blocks of Masal, there's 3 apartment complexes that surprise you when you find them, because they blend in, right? So, and it it was somehow because whatever the reasons why they blend in, I think it's not guaranteed if we just look at setback and height, for example. My second question, again, Ms. Cantana mentioned this, which I thought sounded like a decent idea, about are we planning to go further and identify, we've created opportunity areas, but again, the proposal is to also allow our LDR unit count to increase outside of opportunity areas. It makes you start thinking, okay, we're not just talking about opportunity areas. And she talks about, well, maybe we look at specific neighborhoods and say, we're maintaining this neighborhood. This other neighborhood, we'll allow it to evolve. And then the third term she used was transform. So to me, this is kind of going the next step further from what just designated an opportunity area, because we seem to be saying we think we need it also outside of those areas. Is that plausible, or is there any momentum, any plan to do more of that maintain, evolve, transform designated areas?
Well, that's definitely helpful information, and that's not the first time we've heard that. Again, I think, and I was just using examples. theoretically, in our low density residential, you don't have to change, any of the development parameters. So you end up with the same, building envelope and massing envelope that you would with a single family house. You just have more than one unit in there. So, I think that is probably the simplest to help control building form, is those zoning code requirements and other requirements along those lines. We can always look at, the most significant changes are really along those, commercial corridors and those arterials that really have the height increases with the increases in density as well. The density increases in the LDR, even though density has generally been, a scary concern here in town and in other jurisdictions as well. I think, ultimately, if you have an 8,000 square foot lot, for instance, the maximum number of units, even at 12 dwelling units per acre, is 2.2. So you're still not getting up into some crazy numbers that I think folks are concerned about. And it's how do we create some other guidelines or things along those along that line to help, again, maintain building form. So in outside of those opportunity areas, or maybe in those opportunity areas, but not along the commercial core, we look for opportunities to limit those opportunities, for lack of a better word. I'm repeating myself.
And just a comment on my thoughts is it seems like a good idea, but it also seems difficult to do if we're choosing areas, because it's my criteria versus somebody else's criteria. I'll give an example. So I've ridden my bike back through, I think it's called the Stony Brook neighborhood, where we recently did a project where they were, modifying a ranch house to have a metal seam roof and a few other small things. And there was a big fight over letting it be anything but a ranch house. And I went back and looked at that neighborhood, and it really is very consistently ranch houses through there. I'm not saying, letting it change a little bit was okay, but that felt like a neighborhood where if you started allowing duplexes in it, it's a transform, right? It's a big change to it. And it seems like I'd almost say, well, that's a neighborhood you want to maintain because it's very homogeneous. It's all exactly the same. But then I go into other neighborhoods, like I think it's El Gato off of Los Gatos Almaden. Houses are very different as you go down the street, and if one of them became a duplex, it's not out of character with the neighborhood. And these are harder things to, so I would say, well, that neighborhood could evolve, for example. But I don't know how to do this kind of fairly without it turning into a big problem. So that's all for my questions now, Mayor.
Thank you. Any other questions or just discussion? Vice Mayor.
Thank you. Sort of along the same lines as Mr. Rennie, but in a different way. I want to make sure I understand what is before the General Plan Advisory Committee at this point. Let me start by saying that I like Lee Quintana's information that she sent today. I'd heard it before, maybe from her, but I agree with the concept of if you're going to intensify single family neighborhoods, I believe they should also be within easy walking distance of commercial areas. And I don't know if that's the case, so I'll start with a question from Mr. Paulson. What we call the opportunity areas, and I know that it has a different name yet now, but are the opportunity areas being expanded into single family areas? That's a question.
So Ms. Armour may want to jump in here as well.
Yeah, I'll give a first answer to that, and then Joel may be able to expand. But the way that we translated those opportunity areas was to keep most of the increases in density to the commercial zones that were the centers of those and the medium and high density residential. In the tables that were prepared as part of the approved alternative, there was actually an increase in low density residential, even in those areas that were outside the opportunity areas. So there was a minor increase in density for all low density residential. And then there were these higher increases in density for those areas inside the opportunity areas. So the way that we translated that was, instead of having some low density residential go up more than others, we actually put all of them very close to that outside the opportunity area density. But it is still an increase.
It is still what?
I think Ms. Armour said it is still an increase, I believe she said.
It is still an increase. All right. And do you have, is it using the metrics provided to us by Ms. Quintana, to the extent that you've gone outside the opportunity areas and into single family residential areas, is that extension still within an easy walking distance of the commercial areas? And I'll use Ms. I'm sorry?
I was going to say that one of the things that the GPAC made very clear from the beginning was that the hillside areas should not have any increase in the allowed density over what is currently, that additional development shouldn't be allowed there. Clearly, they are farther from our commercial areas. The increase in density is across all of the low density, not hillside, low density residential, regardless of proximity to commercial.
I didn't mean to say or attempt to say hillside. Hillside is totally outside of my frame of reference. I'm only talking about to the extent that single family residents have sort of been taken into our areas of opportunity. Are those single family areas within an easy walking distance of commercial using the metrics applied by Ms. Quintana?
So I don't have the metrics of Ms. Quintana right at my fingertips, but I will try to pull that up. What I would say is that, the most of those are behind the commercial designations along the boulevard, and then some up along Pollard. But for the most part, they are not very far from those commercial cores that we envision getting redeveloped with potential mixed-use buildings, which would provide additional commercial opportunities in reasonable adjacency to those districts. The concern with the low-density residential, we could also have the consultants look at limiting that inclusion of those in those opportunity areas and see what that does to the numbers. Because as you reduce the number of acres in a certain category, then that obviously impacts the total number of units that can be produced. But that's another option that we could look at, and that would be helpful direction as well.
And when you are looking at the single family residential areas as part of this paradigm, are we assuming a build out of the residents in some form in addition to the ADUs?
Yes, we would be looking at, it's factored in there that this would not only be ADUs, because that has kind of its own separate category. This would be getting, again, more to that missing middle, but it's really gets to be semantics at that point. Someone, could apply for ADUs and get their 3 units, and, that would be accounted for in that category. But there is some assumptions made on some percentage, and I can't remember, I think it's 10, 15% inside and less than that outside for redevelopment of those properties.
So what I think I hear you saying, you can have ADUs and you can have a duplex.
You potentially can, given current state law. So that's irrespective of our general plan update.
All right, so under current state law, a single family residential area can be made into a duplex.
It can be in the form of an ADU, yes. So you could have an attached ADU. I don't believe we currently allow duplex as a permitted use in our R1 zone, R18 anyway. But essentially, yes, with the use of ADUs, you could have, a duplex or a triplex for that matter.
Thank you.
Okay, what I'm going to ask the council to do is concentrate on the questions on 5 and 6. I recognize that there could be that there are questions, but I also recognize that the GPAC is, in the midst of its work. And what we were looking for here was just some council discussion of, is the general plan going in the right direction? Given that we adopted a land use alternative that takes into account a potential 2,000 housing units under our RENA expected allocation, how are we going to accommodate that? And has this general plan that is currently in iteration, is it actually reflecting that? Or, is the general plan that we're looking at kind of copying our existing general plan? Or is it, by saying, for example, referring to the Los Gatos Boulevard plan, saying that we ought to keep automobile dealerships? So, what I had hoped for was that we provide some direction as a council on those kinds of questions. And if part of the direction is, I don't want any increase in the low density residential areas, then, recognize that may affect the adopted land use alternative, or suggest something to the GPAC that, can be incorporated in the general plan. So that kind of direction, hopefully maybe we could do that, maybe we can't. But Mr. Rennie, if you have a direction or a question.
Well, the tough one is the number 2 question about what you just said. Do we allow increase in density in the LDRs outside of the opportunity areas? I still have 2 questions to try to figure that one out, if I could.
Go ahead.
The first one is, in creation of the opportunity areas, have you covered all of the areas that are within walking distance, whatever that means, of commercial zone? I mean, generally they're designed around a commercial zone, but I'm not sure the boundaries may have been drawn a little arbitrary. Would we be able to expand those a little more to make sure they cover everything that's in walking distance, or do they already do that?
And Miss Armour might remember off the top of her head, but I think they started out as kind of quarter mile or half mile kind of bubbles, and then they were refined a little bit from there. So I would say, they may not include everything, but obviously the comfortable walking distance is going to differ depending on the current infrastructure that's in place and then the individual. But they do cover most of the areas around commercial that is generally in walking distance, would be my thought on that.
Second question, if I could draw your attention to the table on page 3 of 4 in attachment 1, it's page 150 on our iPad. That table tells us how many units are coming from various areas. And in there, it has low density residential outside the OA, 164 units. It's a couple lines down there in future dwelling unit, after total future dwelling units. You'll see 164 there. The way I read this is, if we decide in question 2, if the answer to question 2 is no, we don't want to increase density in LDR outside of the opportunity areas, all we lose is 164 units.
That's correct, based on the assumption from the percentage, which, let me see if I can pull that up real quick. And then
I would also add that table is part of the preferred land use alternative. So that's based on the land use alternative framework that was adopted last April. And that is not the table that reflects the current implementation. I believe if you go to page 155 of the packet, you will find a table there that describes the production of housing units
But it
under
doesn't
each of the different land use designations.
but it doesn't describe it inside and outside the opportunity areas. That's why I keyed in on that other table.
And that's because we are not, in this implementation, we are not distinguishing between inside and outside opportunity areas. We're using the existing land use designations for the regulations as they're currently proposed.
But that's the question that's posed to us right now.
Well, I think it's a refined question. I think, you know, the way council is now talking about the opportunity areas creates and gives us the opportunity, so to speak, to work with the consultants to take the table on page 155 and say, okay, how much is this within an opportunity area? Because attachment 7, I believe it is, has the maps of the different opportunity areas now called community place districts. And what you'll see is that the boundaries are more tightly drawn, but in many of the areas, such as the Harwood district, certainly Los Gatos Boulevard, there is single family LDR within those diagrams. And so we could ask the consultants to run those calculations if that would be more informative.
So what I'm really asking is more along the lines that Councilmember Spector was asking about, LDR outside of walking distance. If we eliminate that, what happens to our numbers? I understand there's LDR in the opportunity zones because those were in walking distance. And that's why I asked the other question about, did we really get all of the LDR that's within walking distance when we created these? And that might be something, if we decide that we don't want to have an increase in density in LDR outside of opportunity zones, we may want to expand the opportunity zones to capture LDR that is within walking distance to be consistent with Councilmember Spector's line of questioning.
And we can see if the consultants can make those numbers more apparent on page 155 of the PDF to see if they have a breakdown for inside and outside as well. But, you know, it's pretty small number overall. You know, it's 367, it looks like, total for the proposed general plan with vacant and redevelopment assumptions. So that might be a number that we can work with. But if it sounds like there's a little bit of conversation, and specifically Councilmember Rennie, you know, you're looking at maybe expanding certain areas to include more LDR if it is truly within walking distance, where, you know, most of the input we've heard so far has been trying to refine or shrink some of those areas. So definitely interested in everyone's input on that, though. Yeah,
you know, you got that input, but then you threw in the, yeah, we can increase density anywhere in the towns. I'm going to stop with my comments for now, see what others have to say. Thank you.
Well, so Mr. Rennie, do you have other direction that you want to give now? Because I think I'm going to ask each council person to give direction. I suspect that we're not going to agree. And since we're not looking necessarily for a motion here, rather giving input, I think Ms. Peretti or Ms. Paulson or Mr. Armour, correct me if I'm wrong, is that what we want to do is give direction that ultimately finds its way back to the GPAC. The GPAC is going to then take that under consideration in its work and then bring it back to the Planning Commission and the Town Council. Am I right about that sequencing? Ms. Peretti, you're nodding at me, but.
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
that would be very helpful. Thank you.
So, Mr. Rennie, you've given, you know, some feedback and direction with respect to LDRs. Is there something else that you want to provide as part of the direction that you want to take back to staff, consultant, and GPAC?
I don't have anything else in my mind, but if others mention things, it may spur some more thoughts.
Okay. Let me go to, we haven't heard from Councilwoman Sayak. Councilwoman Sayak, do you have any questions or direction that you wanted to go back, given that structure that I've just outlined?
Sure. A question first. So this is to plan for the next 20 years. Within those next 20 years, we're going to have at least 2 housing elements that coincide. So with one of the bills, I can't remember which one, will not allow us to reuse housing sites. So is an opportunity zone a housing site?
No. So a housing site will specifically be designated when we do our housing element update. So those will be the specific sites. You know, theoretically, someone could say we're going to use this whole opportunity area, but it's more likely we're looking at individual sites there. It wouldn't be the entire opportunity area.
Okay, so then, and the larger context is like, my initial thought is if we can't reuse sites, we want to limit the number of sites. And so is that also the thinking then with these opportunity zones? Look at the specific sites within those zones that could give us the numbers that we need to submit?
Yeah, generally, I think the housing element has its own specific requirements, and as you mentioned, the state law is getting more stringent as far as what can be counted, what can continue to be counted, and then how valid maybe even an existing site within our opportunity area is from an HCD perspective, Housing and Community Development Department. So that exercise is going to be challenging, even with some of the work we're doing currently with the general plan, but that is really going to be the RENA site selection process. And I would just add that there are some sites we probably won't be able to reuse, but there are opportunities built into that regulation that allow you to make other changes, generally going to by right development and things like that to reuse those previous housing element cycle sites. But as this continues to evolve at the state level, we're going to have to try to continue to work through those other additional challenges.
Okay, so that makes me feel better. So I guess overall, in terms of direction, there's only one that I feel strongly about, and that's that we need to remove any references to the Los Gatos Boulevard plan. I think at this point it's obsolete. And a lot of the potential development that we can have is along the Los Gatos Boulevard, and it's adjacent to single family homes. And I understand the inside outside opportunity zone, but to the extent that we could just remove any language that ties what we want to do to obsolete plans that have happened in the past, I think that's the best thing moving forward.
Thank you, Councilwoman Sayak. Vice Mayor, you had questions earlier, but you have specific direction that you want to give now.
I do, thank you. And I always do exactly what the questions ask.
Exactly.
So I'll just look at my notes here, and I didn't even think about we don't use the Los Gatos Boulevard plan. So thank you, Ms. Sayak. I totally agree with that. With regard to the housing, I would begin with a number that is a number that we will be assigned for our RENA numbers. I do recall that GPAC already has its own number, but if that number is higher than what we get or what we think it's going to be now, I would re-examine it. I continue to support the opportunity areas that we defined before. I am not supporting at this juncture going into single family residential areas unless we need those numbers. And then if we need those numbers, I would look to initially the ADUs, which I understand could add another 1 to 3 units. I would not, again, this is more detail than you probably want. I would not at this juncture go above the 3-story limit. And I agree with Ms. Quintana. At this point, I would not modify the current Central Business District. All of those pieces of input would would be impacted if ultimately they didn't result in the numbers that we needed in Los Gatos. But since I don't know that at this point, I'm just going to go with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Okay, I'm not sure that staff is getting the direction that it needs, but hopefully you're taking good notes, and we'll move on from there. I'm actually going to do my direction based on the questions on page 5 of 6. Do the attachments adequately explain the translation of the selected alternative into the land use designations? I would say adamantly no. I have a rule about charts and maps, and that my rule is that if I can't immediately tell what it means, it's no help to me. And there's attachment 1, etc. I don't see how the adopted land use alternatives, which do include the CBD, etc., are actually translated into these charts, because just in being on the GPAC and this discussion and looking at everything, if what I have to do is rely on one of these charts to tell me what the direction of the town is, then I can't do that. So how are we telling the story of what we're trying to do? Where does that appear in our general plan? And what does it end up meaning? So that's my answer to number 1. Number 2, does the council support the inclusion of missing middle? For me, yes, and I define it differently than a product type. I define it as, if I'm not high income and I'm not low income, what happens to me? If I'm low income, maybe I get a little bit benefit. Maybe if I'm high income, I can just buy whatever I want. But if I'm a teacher, I can't buy anything. So to me, that's the missing middle, is an income question, not a product question. But I understand that the product can drive the price. So I sort of want to have those two concepts married in some fashion, but I get that if I'm looking at this plan and it says, okay, you can build to this, I, as a developer, might read that as, okay, well, that's at this price, which ends up being affordable to that middle group of buyers or renters, however it might be. But I think, so from the general plan perspective, as a policy perspective, I want to make sure that our plan creates opportunities for that to happen, whether that's an opportunity zone, a community place, whatever it might be. The policy document should be written in a way that allows that housing category to get produced, right? So if I can't go over 3 stories, or if my setback has to be X or Y, or I can't go into a single family residential district, maybe that never gets built. If that's what my policy document looks like, I want my policy document to allow that to happen. So that's my feedback on that. How much change should the GBAC make of the general plan? Everywhere there's something obsolete, given what we've already decided, that needs to get eliminated. Our 2040 plan cannot be our 2020 plan. So if our 2020 plan says Los Gatos Boulevard plan, our 2040 plan should not say it, especially if a community place district is now evolving on Los Gatos Boulevard, which is completely inconsistent with that plan. Same with keeping automobile dealerships, which is completely inconsistent with that plan. So the direction back to the GPAC and the staff and the consultant to be, hey, while our existing plan may be good in some respects, I don't want a copy of it. I want it to reflect where we're going. I want it to be a forward-looking document that jettisons what's obsolete. With respect to, am I open to, and I think, by the way, that the land use alternative that was adopted is planning for like 2,000 units. I think our RENA allocation that we expect is over that. I think it's 23 or something like that. I forget, but it's right about 2,000. So I don't think there's going to be some opportunity to say, oh, we don't need to do as much. That would surprise me based on what I remember. But so that's my feedback is, to me, I want to have a forward-looking document that allows us to get those units in a way that makes sense, and to recognize that in some respects, what we're all used to seeing for 500 years in Los Gatos may have to change a little bit. There may need to be different looking housing, different looking commercial on Los Gatos Boulevard. There may need to be a duplex in your neighborhood. So I realize that that's not a popular position, but I think that at some point we're going to have to plan for the future, and the future is not going to look the same as today, and today shouldn't look like 30 years ago, et cetera. We're planning for 2040, so we ought to have a planning document. So that is my input on that. Councilwoman Sayoc.
Another question of staff, as we're trying to put all these pieces together, and I so appreciate all of you trying to put this into a document because it's hard to translate given how quickly things are moving. So we have our RHNA numbers, but within that are the different affordability. And I keep looking at this matrix, especially the very low income. And what I've learned through the North 40 process is that you're going to need to produce more moderate to get to that extremely low area. And so do we then as a council need to actually plan for more than the 2,000? Because we know that we actually have to get, the hardest part for us is getting that extremely low. And so as a planner, how do you recommend we accommodate that part of the RHNA numbers? So I'm confident we can meet moderate. I'm just worried about the extremely low and low.
I mean, again, I think through the housing element update, we're going to have to look at those categories. I know we've seen draft numbers that are, close to 2,000 as well. And then they have them split out into different percentages. That gets to be the challenge. Is I think what your point is, the higher those percentages are and the extremely low or very low, for our inclusionary housing to kick in, we may need a higher number and then some other type of mechanism to try to either incentivize or require, some of those other categories that we typically don't see, because we typically see low and moderate. We don't often see folks going into the very low or extremely low, with the exception of the North 40. And then I think Ms. Pravetti might have some additional input.
I just wanted to add that really that level of detail where we're planning and identifying specific properties to rezone to meet our RHNA, that's really the housing element work that's going to happen in short order. It's right on the heels of the general plan update. So we'll be doing all that detailed work. But at this point, we're really planning town-wide. What's our vision for the town? What are our housing strategies that you want to see implemented in the opportunity areas, as well as in other types of land use designations? And really by setting out that larger framework, so to speak, then when it comes to the housing element, we can go into that level of detail of identifying specific properties. But it will be a challenge, and it's going to be a challenge for a lot of different reasons. But having, more opportunities for different housing strategies to work helps us achieve our RHNA.
Okay. And as staff, do you feel comfortable that what is here gives you those opportunities and those tools?
I think what we've done is really look at the logical places to focus growth. Okay. And that's really what the opportunity areas do. Whether the boundaries stay as tight as they're drawn right now, or maybe they expand back out, that's a policy question ultimately. But I think in terms of the places where it makes sense to do mixed use and to see the intensification, I think the team's done good work in that regard.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Rennie.
I just want to follow up because Councilmember Sack articulated something that I've been worried about all along. The numbers that they're talking about are 1,930 or 39 include about 500 very low units. For a developer to build very low units, they usually can't build more than 20, maybe you're lucky 25% at the very low, and all the rest have to be market rate. So that means for 500 units, we need 4 times the number of market rate units. So that means we need 2,000 market rate units in order for a developer to be able to afford to build 500 very low. Well, we have another we have other below market allocations. So the point is, in order to get them all built, you would need to build a lot more market rate units than our total allocation to be able to afford. And so that comes back to, I think she started her comment with, we can't cut it back because we actually probably need more housing than we're planning for to be able to achieve that, unless somehow you can get, some charitable organization to give a whole bunch of money to finance it, basically, which doesn't happen very often.
Okay.
Maybe that's a comment, not a question.
That could be a housing element comment question, not a general plan, but go ahead.
And I did want to make one other comment, and as other people were talking, I may have made it sound like I'm not for missing middle housing. I am for missing middle housing. What I'm having trouble is fitting it into the opportunity zone or not opportunity zone thing, because I think there's another category in there. And maybe, like I gave the example of the Stony Brook neighborhood where it's all ranch houses. Maybe we have something that I don't know how you write it, but it says, well, all the houses in this neighborhood are ranch, so your duplex has to look like a ranch house. Okay, maybe that would work. I don't know how you write that, but that's the idea. And there's other neighborhoods where a duplex would go in much better because it's not homogeneous, it's heterogeneous with a bunch of things going on. And there's a lot of those neighborhoods, but that are more ripe for transition. Neighborhoods that are single story and then that have been moving to second 2-story, those are kind of transitional neighborhoods. Those make more sense to me for missing middle housing to end up in versus upsetting a neighborhood that's very homogeneous. So I just wanted to say I do support missing middle housing. I just don't know how we do it yet.
Okay, thank you. Anything else? Vice Mayor, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is sort of a question for staff. I've always been concerned that when we work on low market housing, we don't get to the lower areas and the lower amounts. And so it seems as though one might be able to do that with the ADUs, and that's going to be a question. And then another way to do it, and I've never figured out how to handle this, but if you make the units smaller, for example, let's say the opportunity areas along Los Gatos Boulevard are 3 stories high. The bottom is the commercial. We have 2 stories of residential. And what, if anything, can we do to encourage or require or whatever those units to be smaller square footage, which will translate into a lesser sales price?
Yeah, I think that's definitely a policy. We can look and see if there's something in there that would cover that, or maybe make it more specific, or add a policy that would address that. I think the challenge with trying to get down, below the low threshold, even for our inclusionary, we need to do a nexus study and figure out, if that's something that makes sense for the town to be able to do through that nexus study process. So I think that's kind of would be the next step for that, type of discussion, which, council could have at a future date. And Laurel might know more about this. I think, as has been said in this meeting, it's, generally nonprofit affordable housing developers or for-profit teaming up with those folks is where you really get, some more of that deeper affordability. But those don't come along very often, and generally they need a much either bigger parcel size or increased densities, which we're doing the latter, and that's really what we're trying to do. And for us, this translates into more opportunities than we have under our current general plan for a number of different types of housing to be produced. And so hopefully that will work for future developers or property owners who are looking to redevelop their sites. But time will tell if we've gone far enough, or we need to reevaluate something.
Joe, that's
Okay.
great. And I was hoping we wouldn't have to rely on an organization to build the housing. If you can come up with some path that we can walk down and at least have the opportunity for smaller units, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to look to Ms. Pravetti and see, have you, or Ms. Paulson, Mr. Paulson, have you got enough input back from the council that you can take back to, that you can work with, that you can take back to the consultants, that you can bring back to the GPAC? Was this adequate in it? Do you need anything more from the council?
I think the policy question about what can happen inside and outside the opportunity areas was very helpful for me, just in terms of thinking through this. And I think we can work with the consultants to tell the story a little bit better and try and translate the alternative a little bit better. I think for me, I appreciate the mayor's comments about question number 3 about being a forward-looking plan, but I think for members of the GPAC who may be watching this recording now or later, I think having clarity from the whole council of, is it okay if the 2040 plan really is more progressive in terms of how we achieve the vision that we all adopted a little while ago. And I know the mayor spoke very clearly on that, but I think it might help the GPAC to hear from a couple of the other council members. Thank you.
On that specific question then, Mr. Rennie?
Well, I wanted to, Barbara made me think, Councilmember Spector made me think of something. Her thought of how do we get smaller units that are more affordable. Can we do that by bumping up the minimum? I noticed that you are bumping up minimums on, certainly the medium density and the high density. The low density went from 0 to 1, but if we bumped up the minimum for those zones, would that help force smaller housing?
It definitely could help with that component. Again, the challenge is that a lot of these are really going to be case by case, depending on the parameters of the existing site. But that would potentially be more incentive for folks to do that. I think we need to be careful in the low density residential, frankly. The ADUs kind of have their own path, but if we start bumping that minimum up, we might start running into challenges. But again, it's going to be site specific. I think the example I gave before was an 8,000 square foot lot at 12 units to the acre is 2.2 something units. So we may not run into as big of an issue because that's at the upper end, at the maximum of that low density residential proposal now. But that's something we can definitely look into.
Okay, so big picture, forward-looking document, static document, backward-looking document. Mr. Rennie, do you have a preference?
I'm not sure what that means, actually.
Okay, I'm going to translate it as no preference. Councilman Sayoc.
I think we have to go forward looking. I think the 2 agenda items, the VMT as well as this, are elements that we have not ever considered in our general plan. So I think based on both discussions, the consultant should probably have a lot of material that we will have to make things change. So I guess forward to the extent that we meet those numbers. So.
I agree with forward now that I know what you were asking.
What it is, okay. Vice Mayor, any thoughts on the big picture?
Sure. The question is, how much change should the GPAC make in the update of the general plan? GPAC should make enough change to meet our mandated RENA numbers, and they should do it as much as possible within the opportunity zones.
Okay, Ms. Pravetti, does that help you? Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Anything else that we need before we close out our meeting tonight? No? Okay, council members, thank you so much. It's been a marathon and you've done great work as always, and we'll see you next time. Thanks. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.